Hey church, we are so glad that you are here with us today. Before we get started in a few moments, I want to tell you a few ways you can interact with us online through this digital gathering. First, you can go to redhills.church/connect card and be able to connect with us online. We'd love to hear how you're doing, maybe a few prayer requests, and just get to know you if you're brand new. Next, you can also go to redhills.church/give and give digitally online today. There's just a few bits of information and you're able to enter all of that online and set up a single time or even a recurring gift. Lastly, we also have kids content on our website. I love it when my son's able to watch worship with us and engage with worship, but then watch the lesson videos online. You can go to redhills.church/kids and find all of today's videos, including printable handouts and PDFs there. Well, we're so glad you're here with us. We're going to get started in a few moments. Hang on tight, grab some coffee, and we'll see you soon.
Welcome to Red Hills Church. We're so excited that you're joining us online today. And if you're a guest with us, we want to say a special welcome to you. And we would love the opportunity to connect with you. And you can connect with us super easy by going to redhills.church and then just clicking on the Connect card button. There you'll find about 30 seconds worth of information to fill out, and it'll allow us to reach out and just welcome you to the family and answer any questions that you might have. Well, today you can worship not only through praise and worship and not only through hearing the word, but you can also worship through generosity. You can go to redhills.church/give and give there, or you can mail it in at the address on the bottom of the screen if you like to give cash or a check. Next Sunday is Communion Sunday. I'm so excited to be able to partake in this sacrament together as a church family. If you haven't done this with us before, this is how it works. Next Saturday from 12 to 2, you can go to 2400 Douglas Avenue, where we used to meet in the high school. We'll come together, do a drive-through where you can come and pick up your elements during those times. And we'll actually have some things for your whole family. We'll have some things for your kids and then a special gift for you as well. Come through, pick up your elements, and get ready for church next Sunday. It's going to be a beautiful time together. Well, in just a few moments, Pastor Aaron's going to be up with a great message. And before then, we're going to spend some time singing together. And I want to encourage you, take a moment, clear out any distractions in your house. Maybe tell your dog to go to another room so he doesn't bark at you. Stand up, get in a posture of worship, and turn up your TV a little louder so you can sing. And let's join in the presence of God together wherever we're at. Let's worship together.
I've searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and treasures and fame are never enough. You came along and put me back together. And every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and faults. Lord, you see them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley, and there's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh yeah, Lord, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing, no, better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is fight for me.
I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive.
I'll raise a hallelujah with everything inside of me. I'll raise a hallelujah. I will watch the darkness flee. I'll raise a hallelujah in the middle of the mystery. I raise a hallelujah. Fear, you've lost your hold on me.
I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive.
Sing a little louder.
Sing a little louder,
Oh, sing a little louder.
sing a little louder, yeah.
Oh, sing a little louder.
Sing a little louder.
Come sing a little louder.
Oh, sing a little louder, yeah.
Oh, sing a little louder.
In the presence of my enemies.
Oh, sing a little louder.
Louder than the unbelief.
Oh, sing a little louder.
My weapon is a melody.
Sing a little louder.
Heaven comes to fight for me.
Oh, sing a little louder.
In the presence of my enemies.
Oh, sing a little louder.
Louder than the unbelief.
Oh, sing a little louder.
My weapon is a melody.
Come sing a little louder.
Heaven comes to fight for me.
Oh, sing a little louder.
I'm gonna sing in the middle of a storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive. I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive.
I raise a hallelujah. I raise a hallelujah. I raise a hallelujah. I raise a Just as I am, you welcome me. How can this be? My past is undone, my past is untethered. I leave it behind and run to my Father. There is no disappointment in your eyes. There is no shame, there is only pride. I am loved, Father, I'm loved by you. Yeah. So unreserved, your heart for me. My fear is gone, I am set free. There's nothing to hide, there's nothing to measure. 'Cause I am your child, and that's all that matters. Come on, sing it out. There is no disappointment in your eyes. There is no shame, there is only pride. I am loved, Father, I'm loved by you. There is no distance in your embrace. Over and over again you say, I am loved, Father, I'm loved by you. I am loved, Father, I'm loved by you. I am loved by you, Jesus. You are changing everything. You are changing everything. I believe it. I receive it. You are changing everything. You are changing everything. You are changing everything. I believe it. I receive it. You are changing everything. You are changing everything. You are changing everything. I believe it. I receive it. You are changing everything. I believe it. I receive it. You are changing everything. Yeah. Oh, yes. Changing my heart, changing my mind. Sing it out, there's no disappointment. There is no disappointment in your eyes. There is no shame, there is only pride. I am loved, Father, I'm loved by you. There is no distance in your embrace. Over and over again you say, I am loved, Father, I'm loved by you. I am loved, Father, I'm loved by you. I am loved, Father, I'm loved by you. God, some of us really needed to hear that today. I pray for those people who feel distant, God, who feel far from you. Would you pull them close to your heart? Would you remind them how much they are loved, all the things that you've done for them, the sacrifice you've made for them? God, we love you. We pour our hearts on you, God. We give our lives as living sacrifices. Come inhabit our places, God. Come inhabit our rooms, wherever we're at. Let us feel your presence this morning. And we love you, Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, church, I'm excited to hear what God says to us through his message. So God bless you as we continue to worship him.
Hey everyone, welcome to week 3 of the series called Built to Last. I'm so grateful that you're joining with us today. And this series that we're going through is about this. It's about working on what matters most in our life. And although we're in a season where we're uncertain about the economy and jobs and businesses, it's important, but it's not the most important thing in this season. The most important thing in this season is your relationship with Jesus, your relationship with your family, and your relationships with your friends. And so Built to Last is all about establishing, building, engineering, and restructuring the relationships in our life to withstand the weight and pressure that we experience in life. And so this series is exploring 3 angles of our relationship with God, that God gave us human relationships, horizontal relationships, to illustrate his vertical relationship with us. And so last week we talked about our marriages, the relationship with our spouse. This week I'm going to talk about parenting, the relationship with our children. And then next week we're going to talk about our friendships. And I want to remind you that as we began this series, I gave you a thought or a theme that is guiding everything we do. And it is this, that we are going to let the God who designed the relationship to be the one who defines the relationship. So many times we allow other people in our lives, we allow a culture and media and music and TV to define the relationships that we have. But wouldn't it be best if we let the designer be the one who defines our relationships? And so I'm going to jump right into this week, and we're going to talk about parenting. I remember as a youth pastor, for those of you who don't know, I was a youth pastor for almost 9 years. And the church that I was a part of was a church that was focused on emotional healing. And we offered counseling as a free service to our church and people in our community. So pastoral counseling. And our church taught all the pastors there to do this kind of blend between biblical and clinical counseling. And to be honest, I was really bad at it. I'm not a counselor. I'm a preacher and I'm a teacher, but I did it. And we would have parents drop their kids off and say, we want them to have counseling. Would you work on my child? And like I said, I was an awful counselor, so we'd just play basketball and just be talking and hang out. And this is what I discovered, that 9 out of 10 times, it wasn't the child that needed counseling. It was the parents that needed counseling. Listen, I want to tell you, the best thing you can do as a parent is realize that you need help. I know it's really hard to be able to ask for help and to say that you're struggling in your role as a parent, but we know this, that parenting is the hardest job in the world. I would say parenting is 10 times harder than what I do on a daily basis, working for the church and serving you. And this is what I've learned, that most parents who want help and need help, this is what they want. They want a strategy for parenting. You see, we desperately want a model for how to parent and ways to parent. Oftentimes people are experiencing difficulties in the parenting in that moment, and they need a solution, a tactic, a strategy, and a model to work right there. Maybe your toddler's having tantrums in Target, and you just want to know, what do I do? Like, just tell me what to do. And I've realized this. I've realized that for parenting, there is no one size fits all. There is no best way. There isn't no best model. And I know there are many books written and they're written based on what worked for the author. But we know this. We know that kids are different, right? There's boys and then there's girls. I raise my boys different than I raised my daughter. And then we face different things in our culture. Now we've got more mental health issues than we've had for a while. And then there's ADHD and autism and special needs. And kids are different. Kids are unique. And so you cannot overlay a strategy upon every single child. And this is what we also know. Not only are kids different, but families are different. There's a traditional family, mom, dad, married at home. There are a single parent just trying to figure out how to raise kids on their own. There are divorced families just kind of struggling with each other and what to do with kids. There are blended families, foster families, adoptive families. There are so many different variables with kids and families that it would be foolish of me to give you a strategy or a model. It's not that I don't believe there are some, but that would be difficult for me to give that to you. So instead of giving you a strategy, I want to give you something else. And before I go on, let me just say this. The right parenting model is the one that works. And if it's not working, then don't use it. So today I want to give you the big picture of parenting. And I want to develop for you a theological framework for what we are to do as mom and dads. And the first problem that we face is this, is that there are not a lot of Bible verses about parenting, especially when you look at the New Testament. And so I'm going to give you a couple verses from the Apostle Paul. And the first one is out of Ephesians chapter 4. Paul says this. He says, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children." I've always wondered what that means, to exasperate your children. I think some people are thinking, my children exasperate me. But he says, instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Paul goes on to say this in Colossians chapter 3:21. He says, "Fathers, do not embitter your children." I find it funny that he's always talking to dads. "Or they will become discouraged." And then he goes on to say this in Titus chapter 2, verse 4. He says, "In this way, they will teach young women to show their love to their husbands and their children." You see, we don't have a lot of content in the New Testament about parenting. And here's what's crazy, that the Apostle Paul, who wrote about parenting, most scholars believe that he wasn't married and he didn't have kids. And so he's not sharing a lot about the specifics of parenting. And then if we can't find a lot of verses in the New Testament, we always go to the Old Testament. And the number one verse that I've heard quoted my entire life, especially as a new parent, was this. It's found in Proverbs. It's "Spare the rod, spoil a child." You've heard it too, right? Some parents use that as an excuse or a license to train their kids or hit their kids. And so this is what we go to. In the Old Testament, the thing that we've got to understand is that parenting and training was based out of the law and instruction. And unfortunately, there are many Christian parenting books that are birthed out of this old covenant law. And early in my parenting, when Brianna and I became parents, we were young and we were given these books. We were given these books that kind of started out with these Old Testament verses about the law, and that was the basis and bedrock of what we were to do. But this is what I want you to understand, that we must remember that we live not under law, but we live under grace. Therefore, we don't parent under the law or the old covenant. We parent under a new covenant worldview. And the new covenant worldview is a view of grace. You see, there's a significant event that happened between the Old Testament and the New Testament. His name's Jesus. It's called the cross and the resurrection. There is grace that we have right now, and we are to parent out of that. And so I want you to write this down, that I am called to parent from a place of grace, not a place of law. I firmly believe and affirm in grace-based parenting. In fact, when I figured out and had this perspective shift from the law to grace, my entire perspective shifted in how I parent. In fact, Brianne and I, we were probably 4 or 5 years into parenting, and then we read a book about grace-based parenting. I think it's called Grace-Based Parenting, and our perspectives changed. And I realized that I was doing things out of rule, out of instruction, out of law, instead of a place of the cross, a place of grace and forgiveness. And so that is the theological framework, biblical framework for parenting, that we parent out of grace, not out of law. Now I want to talk about the goal of parenting. You see, there is a myth out there that a lot of people buy into, and it's not necessarily written, but we all understand it when we become parents. Actually, we understand it before we're parents. And the myth is this, that the goal of parenting is to have obedient children. That we think that the goal of parenting is that my kids behave really well. And many parents start off with the wrong understanding of their role and what their kids should look like. And so many books follow suit that are more about behavior than they are about belief. And they buy into this myth that the goal of parenting is to have obedient children. You see, when you parent for obedience, this is what you want. You want your kids to be good listeners. You want your toddlers to not throw tantrums, all right? You want manners at the dinner table. You want the best compliment for a parent is to go out to a restaurant if you have several kids and have an old lady come up to you and say, your kids are so well mannered. It makes you feel good, right? You give yourself a pat on the back and you puff out your chest and you think that you did it, right? You created good kids. You don't want your kids to say bad words, to not get angry, to do nothing wrong. It's interesting because sometimes we have more expectations of our children than we do of ourselves. I remember early on in parenting, someone came up to Brianne and my child he was throwing a tantrum like you'd never seen. And I think I've told you the story before. He had migraines as a child, and so it was kind of a very difficult season, and he was just really struggling. A parent came up to my wife and she said, that's really strange because none of my kids ever threw tantrums. And the message we received was this: you're doing it wrong, and you're the problem for the tantrum. It's because people believe in the goal, that the goal of parenting is to have well-behaved, obedient children. This is what I want to do. I want to tell you what the goal of parenting is, but I want to give you 2 verses, one in the Old and one in the New Covenant, that talks about the goal of parenting. Proverbs 22:6, many of you know this verse. It says this: train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. And then Paul says this. I read this earlier. Let me read the second part. He says, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. But both of the Old Covenant and New Covenant testify that the role of parenting, of the goal of parenting, is training and instruction. And so, would you write this down? I want you to remember this and know this, that the goal of parenting is to raise children who love and follow Jesus. Let me say that again. The goal of parenting is to raise children who love and follow Jesus. We have a word for this. It's called discipleship. Now, let me tell you, obedience is important, but only obedience out of love and grace. You see, the goal of parenting is to show your kids the nature of God, the character of Jesus Christ, the power of the Holy Spirit, and the grace of what Jesus did on the cross. And the best model for discipleship is Jesus Christ himself. And we've got to look at Jesus for the model of discipleship and the model for parenting. So how did he disciple his followers? He did it with love and grace. And when they messed up, he forgave them. And he was gracious and loving and accepting. And he died for them. But parenting is this. Parenting is intense discipleship. In fact, I would say parenting is the most intense discipleship that you will ever do in your life. So let's talk a little more about grace-based parenting. I want to give you 3 perspective changes to think about this week in your own life, if you are a parent or want to be a parent, that will just change how you think about parenting. The first one is this: think stewardship versus ownership. It's interesting because we often see ourselves as parents as owners, right? These are my children, so I can parent them the way that I want to. And ownership is this: it's motivated by what we want for our children and from our children. So what we want for them and what we want from them. And we think, well, is that wrong, right? But this goes into this, that who they will be for us and what they will give us. And an ownership view of parenting is ultimately more about the parent than it is about the child. We want our will to be done in the life of our children, not always God's will. But stewardship, on the other hand, is ultimately about knowing that our children belong to the Lord. In fact, Psalm 127:3 says this, that children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from Him. And so the Bible views children as this inheritance from God, that God has given us children, not to own, but to actually steward in our lives. And the reality is that we steward our children much like we steward anything else in our life. We know that everything I have is not my own. I am only a manager of what God has given me. And so since children belong to the Lord and not to us, we must view ourselves as stewards, that we are agents of God, entrusted with children to steer them in the ways of God, in the way of love, in the way of grace, in the way of His power. One author that I read in Principles of Parenting, Paul David Tripp, he says this. He says, parents are ambassadors, and that we need to take on this idea of being an ambassador. An ambassador is this: it's someone who speaks on behalf of who they serve and does the will of who they represent. And so we are called to be stewards, not owners. So if you have an ownership view, let me tell you how this plays out. In an ownership view, many parents get their identity, meaning, and purpose, their sense of inner well-being from their children. And so they want their kids to be good and well-behaved and athletic because the belief is this: if they are, it reflects on you. Now think about it. This is an unbearable burden to place your own self-worth on your child. That is what happens when you have an ownership view. But a stewardship view is this. A stewardship view are representatives who get their identity, meaning, purpose, well-being, their inner purpose from the Creator, and teach their kids that their identity comes from the Father as well. Listen, we don't own, we steward. And as stewards, we are trusted with instructing and discipling our kids in the ways of Jesus. The second perspective shift that I think we need to have as parents is to redefine success in parenting. Traditionally, we think of successful parenting when our children attain academic performance or athletic achievement or musical ability or social likability. And when these become the markers of success, then a performance model of parenting is birthed. And what you teach your children, that if success is achievement, that in order to feel successful and not like a failure, you must achieve and succeed in your life. Children get their idea and model of parenting, or their idea of who God is, from the parents themselves. Like we understand the nature of God based on how we were raised with our own parents. And so if we do that, then we give off this idea that God is about achievement and success, that God demands perfection. And we know that couldn't be further from the truth, that that God desires obedience, but more than anything else, he desires love. Because if there's love, then the natural outpouring of that love is obedience. And so success in parenting is this. It is being a faithful tool in the hands of God. It is to be used by God and to point your children in the direction of the Lord. Successful parenting is having a soft heart towards God. You are a success in parenting if your kids fail miserably, but they understand what love, grace, and acceptance actually is. Listen, we all fail in our life, and we all need grace, not only from God, but from the people who love us most. Let me give you the last perspective change to help me as a parent, and I hope it helps you as well, is that long-term transformation versus short-term gain. It's interesting because I believe there's a lot of fear-based parenting out there. I remember hearing this comment. I heard it and I read it in books. And it goes like this. If you don't get your toddler under control, then they will be out of control as a teenager. All right? Now, if we were all together, I'd ask you to raise your hand if you've ever heard that statement. And what happens is that creates fear in us. And if you have a toddler who by nature is rebellious, defiant, right? They don't want to listen to anything you do. They are irrational and emotional. And you think if I just get them to obey and to be respectful, then they're going to be good when they're teenagers. Well, I can tell you story after story of the complete opposite. Even in my own family, where my kids, as they're aging and maturing, that this character is coming out that I didn't know was going to be there. And the truth is that you can't get short-term, or you can get short-term obedience from your children, but it doesn't necessarily mean long-term transformation. You see, if parenting is about discipleship, intense discipleship, then we must have the long view of parenting. And just like us in our own relationship with Jesus, transformation isn't a one-time deal. It doesn't just happen in a day or a week. It's a lifetime of slowly changing into the character and image of Jesus Christ. It's an entire life being transformed by God. And so as parents, we must have patience, endurance, and grace in shepherding our children. I want to tell you a final story in my own life about my parents. And I remember I was in 6th grade and I switched schools, and I was kind of like the only kid who didn't have friends at school. And so the one person who befriended me wasn't the best influence on me. And so I remember that he said, Aaron, come to my house after school, and we're going to go down by the river. And he grabbed he snuck some Lucky Strikes from his dad, and we went down to the river and started to partake in this. And I guess I knew what I was doing, but I was just following what my friend was doing. And all of a sudden, in the moment of me doing this, I hear someone call out, Aaron! And I just freak out, and I look up, and my mom and dad are watching me. I'm down by the Mississippi River. I have no idea how they knew where I was, but it's like the parental instinct that you always know when your child is doing something wrong. And he looked at me and he said, son, you get home right now. And I went and grabbed my bike, and I rode my bike. I remember just experiencing so much fear of what was going to happen when I get home. So much fear that I stopped at a gas station. I lost my lunch. I didn't know if it was from the Lucky Strikes or fear of my dad. And I kept going home. And I walked in my house, and I just expecting my dad to tan my hide, to pull off his belt and just kind of give me one. And he actually looked at me and he said, son, he goes, I'm not going to discipline you. He said, what you did was wrong. And he said, but I don't want you to ever do that again. And I remember that moment. I remember that moment because my dad showed me grace and mercy. My parents in that moment didn't decide to rebuke me and shame me, but instead he showered me with love. I will never forget that. I have a lot of memories, but none that are as powerful of God's grace as that one in my life. Look, parents, I know I've got 4 kids. I know raising kids is so difficult, especially when everyone's at home and maybe some of you are trying to do this homeschool, online school hybrid, and it's just such a struggle. And I want to give you hope in this season that you are a good parent. And good parents do one thing, is they show their kids love and grace, and they show them the heart and character and nature of God. And so as I wrap up, I want to pray in just a moment, but let me ask you, are you parenting out of law or are you parenting out of grace? Are you an owner or are you parenting like a steward? And I want you to remember that parenting is discipleship. It is leading your kids closer and closer to Jesus, even when they fail. And let me tell you, they will fail, but it's leading them on that path. Let me pray for you, church family. Heavenly Father, I pray for every single person and every parent listening right now, God. I pray that, Lord, you give them your grace and your power and your love to be able to train their children in your ways. And Lord, I pray that our children, even being raised in this culture and environment, which seems way more difficult than when I grew up, but God, that you would protect them and that you would heal them, Father, that you would ultimately lead our kids towards your love and your grace. Jesus, we love you and we praise you in your name. Amen. Well, God bless you, church family. Know that I love you, and I'll see you next week.
Well, I loved hearing from Pastor Aaron about parenting with grace. As someone who works with youth and kids and is one day planning on having kids of my own, it was really great to be able to live into this truth that he's presenting us, and I hope you join along with me in that. Well, hey, I want to remind you that you can give online at redhills.church, and you can also find our kids curriculum on there too. Any of our videos, curriculum, and content that we're putting out there for them. And I also want to remind you that you can follow us on social media at Facebook or Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube to see all the curriculum we're putting out there for you all. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye.